Oh, really? Okay.
So yeah, well, good morning, welcome back. All that. Hope you had a nice Memorial Day, a week off. We've had some adventures at Chez Ray, including but not limited to at least one trip to the emergency room for Semois. For those of you who don't get the exciting stories on Facebook, um, the Debbie I was upstairs in a chair asleep, and Debbie was in the basement breaking the faucet. Um, there are Debbie has ways of making it clear that she doesn't like it when I'm asleep and she's not, and that was one of them. Just psychologically, there's something in her psyche says, "Hey, he's asleep. I have to do something." So she was in the basement and turned the faucet, and the faucet came off in her hand. And if you've ever had that happen to you, when that faucet comes out in your hand, water goes spraying out. And so let's just say she let it be known throughout the house that there was water spraying in the basement. Meanwhile, I am upstairs asleep in a chair with a start, realize shrieking wife in the basement, not good. And so I got up, took 2 steps, and proceeded to trip or slip at the top of the stairs, which is not a good place to slip. Just write that down. Things we learned today. Okay, what did we learn from Sunday school? Don't slip at the top of the stairs. Okay, because you end up doing a body surfing down the stairs. Yeah. So the bruises are fading at this point, and for a few days it was quite. I got up, I managed to get up, to get the water turned off. And the sad part about the whole thing is that she didn't hear any of it because she was worried about so I was thinking that she would be, what kind of racket did you make? What happened? Nothing. It was like, there's still water and I'm in excruciating pain here. Yes, I'll turn the water up. Yeah, this better be a good excuse. So I got up actually and was walking around and nothing was bleeding and all. And so actually that day, that was about 3 o'clock or 3:30 in the afternoon. So nothing was bleeding. I'm okay. I don't feel anything broken, kind of thing. Everything can move. And so we had a deacon's meeting that night. So I went to the deacon meeting, and then I slept better that night than I thought I was going to. I thought I was going to just be up all night, and I wasn't. So I thought, oh, okay, this is great. So I went to school the next day, and it was not a good day. Yeah, so that was when I went to see my mom because she was going on a trip, and because it meant make sure that I said, your bag all packed? Yeah, okay, you're good. I said, well, Mom, I was planning on staying here to make sure you got picked up and all, but I need to go to the emergency room, so I'm going to leave you here. And so I did. Spent 3.5 hours. Got to do the whole CAT scan thing and all of that. And so nothing was broken, and so I just was bruised and couldn't do any. When you damage her, it was like the whole right side. When you do that, then anything that involves any sort of core activity is quite painful, and you don't realize how much stuff you do that involves core activity, which is about everything, like getting in and out of bed. It's like I'm lying in bed there thinking, okay, I got to get up. I don't want to get up because it's going to hurt. If I stayed still, I was fine. As long as I wasn't moving, I was fine. I don't want to get out of bed. I have to get out of bed. There are reasons why I need to get out of bed. There are things that have to be done. If you know, that have to be done, that cannot be done in bed. And so it would be a kind of a, and then Debbie's, got the earplugs in because she doesn't want to hear any of this sort of stuff. But yeah, so yeah. But I'm as long as I don't cough a lot, I'm good. Coughing or sneezing. Other than that, I'm okay. I'm as good as I ever was, which is half my usual 51% is pretty much where I am. But so yeah, that was my Memorial Day week off. Today is Happy June. Today is June 1st. So it was on this date in 597 AD that Ethelbert Ethelbert, which if we would have had a third son, he was going to be named Ethelbert. But Ethelbert, King of Kent, which is to say England, was baptized, having converted under Augustine of Canterbury. So there are two St. Augustines. I don't know if you guys realize this. I found this out standing at Augustine's grave in England. So there's Augustine of Hippo, which is the one when most people talk about Augustine, they're talking about Augustine of Hippo, who wrote Confessions and all of that. And then there was Augustine of Canterbury. So the first Archbishop of Canterbury was Augustine. He was also the first missionary sent by the Pope to England. And he was sent, met with Ethelbert. Ethelbert was converted, and he was baptized. So this King of England in 597 AD. In 1660, Mary Dyer is hanged in the Massachusetts Bay Colony for continuing to preach her Quaker doctrine. So the Quakers were, this is again another great example of Protestants killing other Protestants for not following their religious beliefs. I should say, I don't know if Quakers consider themselves Protestants or not, but the Puritans, the American Puritans, really hated the Quakers. They really didn't like the Quakers. There were a lot of things about Quaker doctrine that they did not like, including things like they didn't accept the American social order. They believed in complete equality of individuals. Okay, so there was complete gender equality, there was complete racial equality, which is why the Quakers are the only religious group in America who have consistently been on the right side of the whole slavery issue thing. The Quakers were the first organized group in Illinois, the U.S., the colonies, to come out against slavery, or officially come out against slavery, because part of their doctrine was just the radical equality of everyone kind of thing. And that just, when your society is based on a particular order, and you've got somebody there who's preaching, Mary Dyer, female preaching, okay, that's, can't have that. And they were banned from the Massachusetts Bay Colony. And so, because they would upset the social order. And she kept coming back. And they said, well, okay, there's only one way we're going to make sure you don't come back. And so she was hanged on this date. In 1735, Joseph Hawley II committed suicide. Joseph Hawley II committed suicide. He was committed suicide because he was so upset over the fate of his spiritual future. This was a result, and he was not the only one. This was the result of the zeitgeist at the time, the feeling at the time brought on by Jonathan Edwards, the revival in Northampton that we say is the start of the Great Awakening. In fact, Joseph Hawley's suicide, and there was at least one other, is often credited with being the end of what we consider to be the Great Awakening, or at least this part of it, this Northampton revival. The oddity is that Joseph Hawley is Jonathan Edwards' uncle. So it's somebody in his family that was that people were getting so uptight, upset about their spiritual future that they, rather than, I guess, I don't know, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but it's like rather than worry about it, let's just kill ourselves and find out what it's going to be. So that happened on this date in 1735. In 1826, missionary to France, Johann Friedrich Oberlin died. He was a missionary to France and Germany, kind of the mountain area. If you've ever heard of Oberlin, Ohio, or Oberlin College, they're both named after this particular missionary who died on this date in 1826. In 1855, U.S. adventurer William Walker, okay, so this is just a U.S. guy, he's like 30 years old, invaded and conquered Nicaragua. Just got up one day and thought, I'm going to go invade. He set himself up for president and is considered to have been the president of Nicaragua from 1856 to 1857. He was recognized by the United States as being the president. The other South American or Central American countries didn't like that idea, and a force set up by Costa Rica captured him, and 3 years later he was executed by a Honduran firing squad, because the Central Americans didn't like that. So again, If you ever wonder why Central American countries don't welcome Americans with open arms, it's like we've got a century of coming in and doing stupid stuff like that. Um, that happened in 1855. So in 1917, Boston Braves first baseman Hank Gowdy enlisted in the Army. Right? Okay. No relation to Kurt Gowdy, the sportscaster. He actually, when he was 53 years old in 1942, he enlisted in the Army again. And so he has two claims to fame. Okay. He was a decent baseball player. He's the only baseball player to fight in both World War I and World War II. And he also has the most attempts at getting into the Hall of Fame without succeeding. So he's been on the ballot 17 times. So there's I forget who it is, but there's somebody who was on the ballot who got in on their 19th time. But he's on their 17th time, most Hall of Fame attempts without getting in. So let's see. Well, 1933, the Century of Progress World's Fair opened. My grandparents attended. Any of you have relatives who went? It was on around where Navy Pier is now. Like the World's Fair in 1893 was further down. It was on this date in 1948 that the first Israeli-Arab war ended. Israel was declared a country in 1948, and then the Israeli Arabs immediately declared war, and the Israelites won. Israelis won, and that is in the Arab world that is referred to as the Nakba. The Nakba, which in Arab, as I understand it, means disaster. So several hundred thousand, as a result of that war, several hundred thousand Arabs were summarily removed and told that they could not return. And that's where they went to places like, Gaza, the West Bank, things like that. And finally, it was on this date in 1971 that Reinhold Niebuhr died. Reinhold Niebuhr. Now, many of you may not know who Reinhold Niebuhr is. He's one of the great theologians of the 20th century. He and Karl Barth and others in that. But you probably know, have you ever heard the Serenity Prayer? God, grant me the serenity to know what I can do and what I can't, and the wisdom to know the difference. Reinhold Niebuhr wrote that. So you have been affected by Reinhold Niebuhr, whether you knew it or not. So that's it. We're in 2 Samuel 10. Okay. Now 2 Samuel 10, 11, and 12 form its own literary unit. Okay. Now we've talked about literary units before, and the idea that it's entirely possible that somebody sat down one day and said, you know what, I'm going to write the story of David, and started with 1 Samuel 1 and just wrote all the way through. That would be very unusual because they don't write books that way today. Okay, they start with this chapter 10, then chapter 2, then chapter 8, then chapter 1, kind of thing. The books are never written in the order you read them. And I don't think Samuel was written in the book that was written in the order that you read it as well. So 2 Samuel 10 through 12 was probably a story. And in fact, I think it's going to be kind of interesting because there are 2 points in Samuel that I think are clear on how it's set up that may or may not be true. And you can agree or disagree with me, and I'll get into that when we get going. But a couple things previously, just so we have some groundwork for what we're going to talk about today. So previously, we're going to talk about the Ammonites. So I could talk about 10 through 12 as being the Ammonite chapter because it starts with the Ammonites, it ends with the Ammonites. Okay, so previously, the Ammonites were the descendants of Lot. So going back to Genesis, if you remember, Abraham was called by God, and he didn't have an heir, so he brings his nephew Lot. Lot gets too big, so they split up. Lot goes and moves to Sodom. Sodom is a wicked city. The Lord judges Sodom. Lot ends up in a cave with his 2 daughters. Okay, and his 2 daughters say, "Well, we're going to die, so let's get our dad drunk." This is one of the great stories in Genesis. Let's get our dad drunk, and if we get him drunk, he's going to lose all of his moral inhibitions, and he will sleep with us. And they do this 2 nights in a row, And the second night is the younger daughter, and so it works. They get him drunk. He sleeps with them, and the younger daughter conceives, and her child becomes the father of the Ammonites. Okay, so that's important for two reasons. One, because it tells you where the Ammonites came from, and then we'll get to the second reason a little bit later. Previously, Saul's first great military victory. If you remember when we talked about Saul first became king of Israel in 1 Samuel 11. He's plowing. He hears about the king of Ammon. Okay, and it's his first great military victory was to soundly defeat the Ammonites and their king Nahash. Remember, the Ammonites had surrounded Jabesh Gilead, and Nahash said, we're going to cut off your nose and your ear or something like that. And the people of Jabesh Gilead said, give us a week. And so Saul kills the ox and sends it out to 12 people and say, may God deal. And there's this great battle with Jabesh Gilead. Okay, so that was King Nahash of Jabesh Gilead. So there's a rousing victory by Saul over King Nahash. And previously, David wanted to show kindness, and that is that word hesed, which is an interesting study in and of itself, that the showing of hesed and what that all means, to the son of a fallen king. Okay, and actually it's a little the fallen king is Saul. Mephibosheth is the son. So that we talked about that last time, where is there yet anyone alive of Saul's line? And Mephibosheth here and all of that, and he's going to eat at their table. So with that in mind, moving into 2 Samuel chapter 10, it says, in the course of time, the king of the Ammonites died. Now this would be Nahash. Okay, the king of the Ammonites died, and his son Hanun succeeded him as king. David thought, I will show kindness to Hanun, son of Nahash, just as his father showed kindness to me. Okay, in that, now how does Nahash show kindness to David? Well, we don't know in particular. My guess is, and again, I'm just speculating here, in that he doesn't, whatever arrangement Saul had with the people of, with King Nahash, Nahash continued, whether it was simply not attacking or paying tribute or something like that. So somehow or other, in some way, Nahash, the defeated king by Saul, had shown kindness to David. Okay, so now David wants to show kindness to his son. Okay, so this is all about, this is what he wants to do. David is trying to reach out. David is trying to establish his political connections. He is trying to establish his position as the king of this unified nation of Israel. Okay, so David sent a delegation to express his sympathies to Hanun concerning his father. So the Ammonite king died, and his son Hanun succeeds him. David, perhaps wanting to reset relations, wants to show kindness, hesed, to Hanun. When David's men came to the land of the Ammonites' commanders said to Hanun their lord, do you think David is honoring your father by sending envoys to you to express sympathy? Hasn't David sent him to you only to explore the city and spy it out and overthrow it? Okay, so again, these advisors don't see it as kindness. They just see it as a trick. They see David as an aggressor, because of course that is what David's reputation is, as being a very successful military leader. Okay, and what's interesting about this is exactly what Joab said to David. It's the exact same idea about the visit of Abner. Do you really think Abner is here because he wants to be friends? No, he's seeking out your weaknesses. It's going to be the same thing that's going to be said to Hezekiah later on in Kings. That no, they're not doing anything kind. He's just here to spy out, and then they're going to attack. Okay, so is it true or not? I don't know. But Hanun listens to his advisors. And so Hanun seized David's envoys, shaved off half of each man's beard, cut off their garments at the buttocks, and sent them away. Okay. The Ammonite king died. His son showed kindness. Hanun's advisors suspect a trip. David's embassy, that is his group of advisors, the delegation, is shown obvious disrespect. Okay, now we can get into all of the shaving half the, we could just think of just today. Okay, if somebody comes in with half a beard, you're going to go, wait, what's the deal? What's going on? Okay, if I showed up with half my clothes cut off, you'd be like, okay, what were you sleeping again while Debbie was out working? Something like that. Okay, you would you think something's wrong. Okay, so we don't really need to. This is sort of a cultural thing that transcends the generations. Okay, he clearly is showing disrespect to the delegation, and they know it. This is intentional. Okay, you don't accidentally shave half of someone's beard off. It would be a very, very hard thing to do accidentally. Okay, I cannot imagine a way that you could do it at all accidentally. Okay, so it's clearly a repudiation. It's clearly a we don't need your help. We watched a Shakespeare adjacent thing the other night and looking at a bit from Romeo and Juliet. If you've ever seen Romeo and Juliet, the Shakespeare play doesn't end well. Just saying, just warning you. But one of the things, it starts off because people talking about biting their thumb. You bite your thumb at me? No, I don't bite my thumb at you, but I do bite my thumb. Kind of this weird little, clearly meant to show disrespect. Okay. When David was told about this, verse 5, when David was told about this, he sent messengers to meet the men, for they were greatly humiliated. The king said, stay at Jericho till your beards have grown, and then come back. So obviously the clothes can be fixed real quick. Just give them different clothes and just stay here till the beards grow back, and then things will be fine. And again, this is David showing his kindness to these guys. Then again, David doesn't want these guys coming back into Jerusalem with this very clear repudiation that from Hanun, from the Ammonites. Okay, so I mean, it's kind in that he doesn't subject them to further humiliation. On the other hand, he doesn't have these guys walking into Jerusalem advertising that, hey, guess what the Ammonites think of us? Okay, so on hearing this, David said, et cetera, let me double check here. Ammonites, it's shown obvious disrespect. Okay, let's see. When the Ammonites realized that they had become obnoxious to David, so I'm curious. It doesn't say. The text doesn't tell us when they realized this. Maybe there were other wiser people who said, this isn't going to go over well. Okay, David's not going to like that. You don't just go, I mean, maybe it's one of those kind of deals where you see somebody wearing something, and maybe you have a child and he or she dressed in a certain way, and you said, that's not going to work, whatever you're trying with that outfit. Oh, no, it's going to be great. It's going to be great. And they go out and then they come back and they tell you that it didn't work and it happened just like you said. And your head explodes because all you want to do is shout, I told you so at the top of your lungs, but you're too good a parent to do that. Okay, nobody in here. All of us would have shouted, I told you so, kind of thing. But, in other classes, they wouldn't have, but, maybe that's it. Maybe they see what's happening with David. Maybe they realize, but they say, we got to get some help. And so they go to the Arameans, another country that we've dealt with in the past. But so when the Ammonites realized that they had become obnoxious to David, they hired 20,000 Aramean foot soldiers from Beth Rehob and Zobah, as well as the king of Maacah with 1,000 men, and also 12,000 men from Tob. So they assemble an army. Okay. Maybe it's just that, prior, when Nahash was the king, it was okay. Now suddenly Hanun, the king, has made it clear to, no, we don't like the Israelites anymore. Like, okay, we don't like the Israelites anymore, kind of thing. So they hire this army expecting a battle. When the Ammonites realized, they hired this thing. On hearing this, David sent Joab out with the entire army of fighting men. Okay. The Ammonites assemble an army of previously defeated nations and city. David sends Joab to take care of the situation. Okay, so now you've got this huge army building, the same army, the same nation state that was Saul's first great victory, and David sends Joab to fight. David stays home. Okay, just Hold that thought. We're going to come back to that in a minute. David stays home. David is not in this battle. And now we have the description of a battle coming up. Okay, so David sent Joab. The Ammonites came out and drew up in battle formation at the entrance of their city gate, while the Arameans of Zobah and Reba and the men of Tob and Maacah were by themselves in the open country. So essentially there is a two-front battle here. There's the city and there's another group out here. Okay, so there's a two-front battle. Joab saw that there were battle lines in front of him and behind him, so he selected some of the best troops in Israel and deployed them against the Arameans. He put the rest of the men under the command of Abishai, his brother, and deployed them against the Ammonites. Remember Abishai? There were three of them. There was Abishai, there was Joab, there was Asahel. Okay, Asahel was killed by Abner. Joab killed Abner. So there's still these two brothers. They're both military commanders. Okay, so one of the battles is out in the open country. One of the battles is in the city. Okay, Joab is taking care of the city side. Abishai is taking care of the countryside. Okay, and he says to them, Joab says, if the Arameans are too strong for me, then you are to come to my rescue. But if the Ammonites are too strong for you, then I will come to rescue you. Be strong and let us fight bravely for our people in the cities of our God. The Lord will do what is good in his sight. Okay, actually it's the other way around as far as who's fighting. Then Joab and his troops with him advanced to fight the Arameans, and they fled before him. When the Ammonites realized that the Arameans were fleeing, they fled before Abishai and went inside the city. So Joab returned from fighting the Ammonites and came to Jerusalem. Okay, so again, this turns out to be, well, let me go back. The Ammonites create two fronts. Joab splits his army with Abishai, his brother, and they prepare for battle. Joab encourages Abishai, be strong and let us fight bravely for our people and the cities of our God. The Lord will do what is good in his sight. Okay, so again, is Joab a man of faith? Apparently. You kind of think, well, Joab he murdered Abner and all of that. Maybe he's not. Maybe he is. I don't know. He clearly is a decent commander. He's a good commander. He wins this tremendous battle. He and his brother Abishai win this tremendous battle. Then Joab and his troops advanced, etc. After the fight, so Joab returned from fighting the Ammonites and came to Jerusalem. Okay, the Ammonites and the Arameans both flee, but they fall back to regroup. This time, after the Arameans saw that they had been routed by Israel, they regrouped. Hadadezer had Arameans brought from beyond the Euphrates River. They went to Helam with Shobach, the commander of Hadadezer's army, among them. When David was told of this, he crossed the Jordan and went to Helam. So now David is going to be the leader of the second part of the battle, second part of the war. Okay. When David was told of this, he gathered all Israel, crossed the Jordan, went to Helam. The Arameans formed their battle lines to meet David and fought against him, but they fled before Israel, and David killed 700 of their charioteers and 40,000 of their foot soldiers. He also struck down Shobach, the commander of their army, and he died there. When all the kings who were vassals of Hadadezer saw that they had been routed by Israel, they made peace with Israel and became subject to them. So the Arameans, and I love this last one, so the Arameans were afraid to help the Ammonites anymore. Well, yeah, okay. But so now, let me say, this time David leads the battle. The Arameans were afraid to help the Ammonites anymore. I don't know, once bitten, twice shy. I don't kind of thing is what I have there. Okay, so let me re-summarize this thing. So there's this big battle with the Ammonites. Okay, and David sends Joab. David stays home. Okay. Battle goes on. One part of the battle is at the city of where the Ammonites are, the capital of the Ammonites. Okay. Then in the second part of the battle, there's David comes back out, is part of the battle, and it wins a great victory. Okay. So and then everybody is fine. Okay. So that's chapter 10. Okay. Now chapter 11, we start. So I think, and this is the first thing that I think. Okay. I think the events of chapter 11 take place during that first battle. Okay? Can't prove it. Speculation. Disagree with me if you want. But I think, because if you think about the story as a literary unit, it works out really nice. Okay? So, whatever is going to happen in chapter 11 is taking place in is the events of chapter 11. What's going on in Jerusalem is happening while Joab is out fighting the Ammonites. Yeah. So meanwhile, okay. So in chapter 11, beginning with verse 1. Okay. Any questions so far? We'll see why this works. Okay. In the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, David sent Joab. Okay. So there's a war. David sends Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained in Jerusalem. Okay. So Joab is out fighting the Ammonites. David is back in Jerusalem. Okay. Now, let me stop for a minute. Most of the time when people tell the story of David and Bathsheba, they start with chapter 11, verse 1. Okay. And again, I said this last time, the story doesn't start there. I mean, you could go back, the story starts in Genesis 1:1. Okay, I get that. But the literary unit starts in chapter 10. Okay. So that you've got this battle with the Ammonites going on. Okay. And we start with chapter 11, verse 1. And there's almost always an indictment of David saying he should have been out in the battle. This is a clear sign that David was where he shouldn't have been. Okay. Very few commentators agree with that. Okay. This is a time marker. That's just telling you what time of year it is. Okay. There is no rule that says David has to, or that the king has to be on every battle. Okay. Now, maybe it is, but you can't just go, oh, here, this isn't going to end well because David's not where he's supposed to be. Okay. Because previously and later, we're going to see in the story of Samuel, the king not at the battle. In fact, there's going to come a point where later on in Samuel, where the army is going to say, David, please go home. They're going to ask him not to be a part of the battle because there's too much at risk when the king is there. Okay, so it's a time marker. Okay, now the actual word there that's translated kings actually is usually translated delegations, and there are some translations that will do that. There's this tricky little thing. It's the word went forth. Okay, so there's kings went forth. Okay, so that word that's translated kings is usually translated delegations. The word that's translated went forth is a word that's usually only used when it's a king. Okay, so for example, if I said something like, if I talk about the word, I said something, that says something about my authority level. Okay, but if I said I decreed something, you think, oh, you must have some authority. Okay, so if I said, if I told you I went home and I told my wife, I decreed that I can nap anytime I want, you all would laugh because you said you don't have that kind of authority, right? So there's something about the word decreed that implies authority on the part of the person speaking. So there's something about the word that's translated went forth that implies authority on whoever is doing the going forth. And so when translators look at that, even though the word itself is delegation, they say, oh, there's some authority in that. It's usually translated kings. Okay? So it could be that the delegation went without the king, at the king's authority, whatever. But it's just, this is what time of year it's happening. But we know from the previous, so if you think about it, if you go with the word delegation, when the delegation went out to war, which they just did, we just heard about in chapter 10, David stayed home. Okay, it just kind of tells you where David is. Now, clearly David is going to be where he doesn't need to be or shouldn't be. There's no question about that. Okay, but this verse itself, it's not there in the text. Okay, that isn't written there to indict David. I just say that because every time I've heard this preached, it always starts with an indictment of David based on that verse. Okay, so this time David leads the battle and returns. Meanwhile, in the season when kings go out to war, David sends Joab out to fight the Ammonites. David stays home. Some manuscripts say kings and some say delegations. Again, it's when we talk about the manuscripts with the Old Testament, I've mentioned this before, we have the Septuagint, we have the Masoretic text. LXX is the Septuagint. Masoretic text is the complete Old Testament. The Masoretic text is from about the 8th century AD. The Septuagint is a Greek translation, which is from 200 BC kind of thing. So it's like, okay, which is the better text? it's anybody's guess. I mean, there's reasons and arguments, et cetera, et cetera. The evidence of 2 Samuel 11 may be taking place during 2 Samuel 10, 7 through 16. Okay, this is, I should have put this, this is what I think is going on. You can disagree with me if you want. It doesn't, it just makes it a neater, tighter story. Okay, it doesn't change what David does or the effects or anything like that. Okay, but be that as it may. The events of 2 Samuel 11 may be taking place during 2 Samuel. The king doesn't accompany. Later in Samuel, David will be specifically asked not to be with the army. Thus, the text sets the time of the story and is not an indictment of David. It's just telling you when this happened. Okay, so to me, this is the author's way of saying this is going on during the events of 2 Samuel 10. Okay. Then there's a side note I put on the note here. Note in the text the number of times the word sent is used, okay, as we get into the story. And I think we all are aware of what we're getting into. I don't think I'm surprising anybody here. But it's interesting. Note how many times the word sent is used and ask yourself just how many people are aware of what is going on. Okay. So, I mean, he's the king. He's in a castle. He's in a palace. Okay. I mean, how often does the king do something that nobody knows about? Somebody knows about it. You know, every time, and I know right now there's a bunch of books coming out about, you know, the last year of President Biden's presidency. But, you know, every time a president leaves office, somebody writes a tell-all biography and goes, I can't believe that was going on in the White House. Okay. It happened with Obama. It happened with Bush. It happened with Reagan. Okay. This is just how it is. Okay. I read a book once when I was working for Ford. It was later in my career at Ford. I read this book about the guy who had been the CEO of Ford and for 3 or 4 years while I was there, while I was in Dearborn. Okay, so I did a tour of duty in Dearborn, Michigan, right, where I was like in sight of the world headquarters kind of thing. And they were telling all of this stuff that was going on. And I'm like, I was there. I was as far away from this guy's office. I never saw him, but I was as far away from this guy's office as I am, like from this building across the street here. And I never knew any of this stuff was going on. I wasn't the most attentive person, I will give you that. But be that as it may, it was somebody's going to write. People know what's going on. Maybe not everybody like me, but people know what's going on. All right. So here we go. Let's get into this story. One evening, chapter 11, verse 2. Now we're getting into the basics of the story. One evening, David got up from his bed and walked around on the roof of the palace. Okay, so some have said it's like an afternoon nap he's taken. He gets up, it's nighttime. He walks around on the top of his palace. From the roof, he saw a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful, and David sent someone to find out about her. Okay, so think about this, okay? We know a couple of things so far, okay? First of all, wherever he is, his house, his castle is higher than the houses around him, or certainly higher than the house next to him. And that would make sense. It's the king. Of course he's going to have a higher castle, okay? And we learn later on in the text that she's bathing herself because it was the end of her menstrual cycle. This was a tradition, or this was part of the Torah, how you deal with it. But what we know is, what that means is she is not pregnant. Okay? So, and the other thing is that his house, this house where she lives in, is close enough that David can both see her, recognize that it's a beautiful woman. Okay, so it's not like she's this far, but close enough that he can look. He can't recognize her, or maybe it's just that he doesn't know who she is. Okay, but he can look. The house is close enough that he can see, oh, that's a very beautiful woman. Okay, so David sent someone to find out about her. Hey, who is this woman? Okay, he wants to find out. Okay, now you'd think, based on what he hears, he would say, all right, I'm done. So David sent someone to find out. The man said, she is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam and the wife of Uriah the Hittite. So David's on his roof, sees a woman bathing. I can see that she is beautiful. It stands to reason that the houses are fairly close enough. I mean, not right next door, but close enough. She was bathing at the end of her cycle, which is to say she's not pregnant. Flip over to page 2. David sends to find out who she is. She is Bathsheba, the daughter of one of your mighty men. Okay, now we find out later in Samuel, if you remember, when we talked about Saul, we said something about Saul was that whenever Saul found a great warrior, he would conscript him to work in his army. Well, David was doing the same thing. And at the end of Samuel, there's a chapter that's just a list. These are David's mighty men. These are David's great warriors. And there's a couple of series of short anecdotes at the end of Samuel where you hear about things that these mighty men were doing and would do. Okay, so they're mighty, he's mighty warriors. So he finds out that Bathsheba is the daughter of one of her mighty men. Now, if you drill down a bit, you'll discover that she's the granddaughter, that the mighty man is the son of somebody who is one of David's advisors. Okay, and she's the wife of Uriah the Hittite, who is also another one of David's mighty men. Okay, so that, like by mighty men, we're talking these are the Rangers, the Green Berets, the SEAL Team 6 of the Israelite army. Now you'd think that if you said, that is a very beautiful woman over there, I really want to know more about her, and you find out that she is the daughter of one of your mighty men, people who are very good in battle, very good with a sword, and the wife of another one of your mighty men, very good in battle, that you would say, okay, maybe this might not be. But what did Samuel say about a king? In 1 Samuel 8, Samuel said, your king will take and take and take and take. Okay? He didn't say that a bad king will take or an evil king will take. He said, this is what a king is going to do. And David, perhaps, in his sense of entitlement at this point, thought, well, they're loyal to me. They'll give me whatever I ask. And if I ask them their wife, if I were to ask them, I know I'm not speculating here. Actually, this is more hallucinating. No, not speculating tends to have a little more reason. But if I were to ask them, they'd say okay. So they're not here. They're off battling. Let's see how far I can go with this. Okay. She is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, and the wife of Uriah the Hittite. Then David sent messengers to get her. She came to him, and he slept with her. Now she was purifying herself from her monthly uncleanness. That's how we know. So we know she is not pregnant at the time of this event. Okay. The woman conceived and sent word to David saying, I am pregnant. So let's see. I'm going to get ahead of myself here. David, knowing all of that, David sends to her. Okay. Now again, note the subject verb here. He sends. Okay, so she's Bathsheba. David sent to get. She came to him. He slept with her. Okay, the woman conceived and sent word to David saying, I am pregnant. Okay. The woman conceived and sent word to David saying, I am pregnant. Okay, now this is awkward for David. What am I going to do here? Because, you don't want to come back, and because he doesn't know how long it's going to take for this battle to get over. He doesn't want to come back and have Uriah come back to an obviously pregnant wife when he wasn't there. Okay, I mean, how many stories have been written where that takes place? Comes home to a pregnant wife or something. Okay, that's not going to work. So he needs to do something. He's got a backup plan. Okay. So David sent this word to Joab: send me Uriah the Hittite. No explanation why. Just send me Uriah the Hittite. And Joab sent him to David. When Uriah came to him, David asked him how Joab was, how the soldiers were, and how the war was going. How's it going, Uriah? What's going on? How's it going? Kind of thing. He asked him a series of simple questions. Okay? Questions that could have been answered by any messenger. A letter. You ever have this meeting could have been an email? This could have been an email here, okay? How's it going? Good. All right, great. Now, at one point, so David sends, when Uriah came to him, David asked. Then David said to Uriah, go down to your house and wash your feet. So Uriah left the palace, and a gift from the king was sent after him. Now, when it says go home and wash your feet, there are some that look at this and say this is a euphemism. This is his telling her, go home, spend some time with your wife. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. Know what I mean? Kind of thing. Okay. It's like, because the washing of the feet, after a long time, this is something the wife get taken care of by your wife. Okay. So some have suggested that David is doing this kind of, you've had a hard time. Isn't your wife very beautiful? Go home. Go home and see your wife. Okay. And as he leaves, he sends a gift after him, which is, I get this, I get a kick out of this, or just I'm intrigued by this. What was the gift? What was the gift? I mean, a new shotgun? I doubt it. It's like, what was the gift? He really, and I'm guessing it's a bottle of champagne and bathrobes or something. Something to say, hey, have a good time, kind of thing. Okay, sends a gift after him. I mean, David isn't the most subtle. Okay, I think it's pretty clear what he wants. And a gift. But Uriah slept at the entrance to the palace with all his master's servants and did not go down to his house. Why not? Well, in 1 Samuel 21, as you remember, when David goes to Abimelech, the priest, he needs some food. He says, the priest says to him, why are you alone? And he says, oh, well, my men are all over there, and I'm on a secret mission. Do you have any food? And the priest says to David, well, yeah, I've got food, but it's consecrated food. And David says to the priest, he says, oh, well, my men have not been with any women because that's how I do it. This is the Stand translation. This is how I do it when we're out on a battle. Okay, my rule is that when we're on a battle, we don't go sleeping with women. Okay, so what is Uriah? Well, he's out on a battle. And he's got a temporary respite. He's got the king going, but he's got, he's a mighty man. Okay, he's like Green Beret, right? This is a serious all-in kind of battle guy, right? He's like, no, I'm not doing that. Okay. David was told Uriah did not go home. Okay, so David's got somebody watching Uriah. How many people are aware of what's going on? Okay, a lot. Okay, everybody knows. Somebody had to. Oh, hey, send a bottle of our best champagne home with him. Or a bottle of nicest wine to go home with him. Okay, why? Why is David pushing this? Okay, so he asked Uriah, haven't you just come from a military campaign? Why didn't you go home? So David confronts him. Hey, what's the deal? Why didn't you go home? I heard you slept out there. He slept at the entrance to the palace with all his master's servants. So all his master's servants know that Uriah did not go. Maybe he's sitting there sleeping with this bottle of wine from the king. And they're going, that's a nice bottle of wine, isn't it, for you and your wife? Yeah. Okay, So Uriah says to David, the ark in Israel and Judah are staying in tents, and my commander Joab and my lord's men are camped in the open country. How could I go to my house and eat and drink and make love to my wife? As surely as you live, I will not do such a thing. Okay, I believe, and that's the YTB, your teacher believes, Uriah knows something's up. That is my opinion. Uriah knows something's up. Because he explains explicitly to David what David was only hinting at before. How can I go home and make love to my wife? I'm in a battle. And as surely as you, David, the person I'm loyal to, live, I would never do that. Not even you could tempt me to do that. So I think Uriah knows what's going on. It just, why would he, just suddenly not, okay? Uriah said, okay, then David said to him, stay here one more day, and tomorrow I'll send you back. So Uriah remained at Jerusalem that day and the next. He actually stays 2 more days. David keeps him 2 more days. At David's invitation, he ate and drank with him, and David made him drunk. But in the evening, Uriah went out to sleep on his mat among his master's servants. He did not go home. Now, where did David get the idea that if you get the guy drunk enough, he will lose whatever moral inhibitions he might have had and go and sleep with his wife anyway. I mean, it's not that it's a new story or it's kind of thing, but where did the Ammonites come from? Okay, if we get him drunk enough, he'll get over this. Well, apparently, Uriah's moral fiber and Lot's moral fiber, which has never been given a lot of quality for being very high to begin with, okay, are hugely different. Even though he's drunk, he is still not going to go home to the wife. But in the evening, Uriah went out to sleep on among his master's servants. He did not go home. Everyone knows that Uriah is not going home. Now, the thing is, the house isn't that far away. Remember, the house is close enough that David can say, that's a very beautiful woman. Let's go find out about her. So it's not like he's here in Downers Grove and Uriah's house is in Evanston. Okay? It's more like he's here and Uriah's house is there. And rather than cross the street and go into the apartment building, he's sleeping on the doorstep. So Uriah is going out of his way to not go home. Okay? This is why I think, Uriah knows what's going on, or he knows something's going on. Why does the king bring me, a mighty man, home to find out how Joab is doing? Okay? Why not send a messenger? How the battle is going? Why does he bring me home and then send me off? Why is the king so interested in getting me to go home and spend some quality time with my wife? Okay? I mean, really, if anyone came up to you, and was really hinting something along that line, you'd be like, what's the deal with you, man? What? Right? You're like, what's going on? Okay? So Joab, let's see, keeps him 2 more days, then sends him back to the front with a letter. Okay, so where am I? In the morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it with Uriah. So he knows Uriah can be trusted to follow rules because he's following a rule that David set up and he can't even get Uriah to break the rule. In it he wrote, put Uriah out in front where the fighting is fiercest, then withdraw from him so he will be struck down and die. Okay? So David keeps him 2 more days and sends him back to the front with a letter instructing Joab to essentially kill Joab, or to kill Uriah. Okay. Now, where does David get this idea from? Remember Saul and his 100 foreskins? It's like, I'm not going to lay a finger on David. I'm going to put him into battle and let the Philistines kill him. Okay, so, all right, I'm not going to stab him here, but, I mean, if Uriah were to fall in battle, who's going to know, right? Who's going to question that? So while Joab had the city under siege, remember? Now, to me, again, Joab is in this fight. There's a city involved. There's a siege involved. So he sends back to Joab. He sends Uriah back to Joab. So while Joab had the city under siege, he put Uriah at a place. Basically, let me go back to where does David get this idea from? Saul. Joab, ever the obedient servant, follows the king's instruction. So while Joab had the city under siege, when the men of the city came out and fought against Joab, some of the men in David's army fell. Moreover, Uriah the Hittite died. Okay. So again, Uriah is another one of the heroes of Samuel. Okay, I mean, there's several guys like Jonathan, guys that are they are just top-notch guys all along. Okay, Uriah is one of them. Okay, he didn't deserve any of this. He was loyal. He was obedient. He was focused on what he needed to do, and he got killed for it. Okay, he didn't get killed for it. He got killed because of it, I guess. But so Joab sent again. Joab knows what's going on. So the interesting thing here is it's a side note. remember, David has this thing about Joab because Joab killed Abner and he puts his curse down on him and all of that kind of stuff. So David had something on Joab. Now Joab has something on David. Okay, Joab knows why Uriah died, and it wasn't because of his bad generaling. Okay, so Joab sent David a full account of the battle. He instructed the messenger, "When you have finished giving the king this account of the battle, the king's anger may flare up," because Joab knows there's a hole in this story. There's a poor element. There's a bad element in this story. So the king's anger may flare up, and he may ask you, "Why did you get so close to the city to fight? Didn't you know that they would shoot arrows from the wall? Who killed Abimelech, son of Jerubbesheth?" This is Gideon. "Didn't a woman drop an upper millstone on him from the wall so that he died in Tebez? Why did you get so close to the wall?" Okay, so again, this is like this is a story from Judges. Okay, so apparently it's a fairly common, in the rules of war. Don't get too close to the wall, right? Don't get too close to the wall. Okay, it's like, there's just one of these rules that you don't. And as soon as he would hear that, David would get like, "Why did you do that?" So Joab is imagining what happened, and then he says to his servant, "If he asks you this, so Joab wants David to go through the whole message of really, David only wants to know that Uriah the Hittite died. If he asks you this, then say to him, 'Moreover, your servant Uriah the Hittite died.'" This is one of David's mighty men. Okay, again, this is not just a soldier. Okay, this is not just some guy that David found, just another soldier. Okay, this is one of David's mighty men has died. Okay, so you'd think that would be significant. David's reply. So Joab prepares a report for David, anticipating the king's response. The messenger is sent, and the message is delivered. The messenger set out, and when he arrived, he told David everything it sent him to say. And then he now it's not clear whether this is a summary, but or this is just a repetition of what the guy said, because it's not quite how Joab put it. Because this guy pretty much leads with the fact that Uriah died. So it seems to me that the messenger is aware of what David wants to hear. Joab is aware, the messenger is aware, all of David's servants are aware of what's going on. Bathsheba is certainly aware. Bathsheba's servants are aware. Everyone in the castle is aware of what's going on. The messenger said to David, "The men overpowered us and came out against us in the open, but we drove them back to the entrance. Then the archers shot arrows at your servant from the wall, and some of the king's men died. Moreover, your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead." He doesn't even wait for David to reply. "Moreover, your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead." David's response is so philosophical. David told the messenger, "Say this to David, don't let this upset you. The sword devours one as well as another. Oh well, people die. Sorry, too bad." Okay. Press the attack against the city and destroy this. Say this to encourage Joab. Please help my poor brother Joab, my poor nephew, cousin, nephew. Lost track. Nephew, right? Nephew. He's the nephew or he's a cousin, one of the two. He says, yeah, cousin, you're right, cousin. My poor cousin Joab, encourage him. He's no doubt sad about this. I don't think Joab is sad at all. Okay, Joab had no problem with pulling Abner into a corner and stabbing him. I don't think Joab is upset about this. Joab is, if I'm Joab at this point, I'm thinking, okay, finally, I've got something on him. I've got something on him. He's not quite as perfect as we thought. Okay. Say this to us. When Uriah's wife heard that her husband was dead, she mourned for him. Now, this is probably a week. Usually they figured it's a week, maybe a month. After the time was over, David had her brought to his house. She became his wife and bore him a son. Everyone lived happily ever after. David is just doing a great thing here because, she's, and we talked about this with Abigail. Remember with Abigail, when Abigail's husband died, now suddenly she's lost without a husband. And now David is willing to step in and lo and behold, what a surprise. A child is born. kind of thing. Okay. David had her brought to his house, and she became his wife and bore him a son. Okay. Now, I think that this takes place during that first battle while Joab is fighting and there's a split and all of that. Because then what happens is, and I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here for next week, because then David realizes I shouldn't be staying around here anymore. Who knows who else I'm going to see from the roof. David goes out and he has this great battle against the Ammonites. Okay. And now after this great battle with the Ammonites, David comes back thinking at the beginning of chapter 12 that I really got away with something. That was close, but I really got away with something. Except the narrator lets us know, but the thing that David had done displeased the Lord. Ooh, that's not. Maybe if you were ever a kid and you did something, and your parent says to you, your father was not happy with what you did. That never happened to me. Often, more than once or twice a day, kind of thing. David. So after Uriah's death, Bathsheba mourns for him. David had her brought, and he marries her. Okay, compare this to Abigail. Nabal dies. David steps in. Yeah, I'm going to marry her. All right. Now, if you'll indulge me for a minute, we're at 10:06, but this question, this event has become a flashpoint in the 21st century, as far as when we talk about David. Okay, and we talk about David and Bathsheba. Okay, and a lot of where you stand on stuff kind of is how do you define this incident? Okay, in other words, does it rise to the level of sexual assault? I'm thinking in terms of 2025 standards. And there are people, and I've seen Facebook memes or Instagram or something that if you can't call this rape, then you are no friend of the women's movement or women or something like that. So let's look at this for a second and just kind of say, does it? Okay. So by the standards of the day, is this rape? Is this, and it wouldn't be, not necessarily forcible, but at least statutory. Okay. By the standards of the day, comparing 2 Samuel 13. In 2 Samuel 13, we have the story of Amnon and Tamar. Okay. This is where Amnon brings Tamar in, and the author of the book very clearly says he forces her, and the NIV translate as, and he raped her. Okay, so what we know is that the author knows the word rape. He knows how to describe a sexual assault, and he does not describe one here. Okay, so by the standards of the day, no. Okay, and I think a better way to put it, or another way to put it, is besides just the standards of the day, the writer of the book certainly doesn't want you to think it that way. Okay, and there's some argument to say that she's complicit in this, and I think if you try to make Bathsheba part of this, a willing part of this, she comes to him because he said she comes. Well, she didn't have to come. Okay, well. She knows she could become pregnant, right? Later on, we find out that she works to ensure that her son becomes king. Not the son that was born, the next son. Okay, we'll find out what happens to this son next time. Okay, she knows it. So later on, we find she works to ensure. So there is an argument out there that says, well, Bathsheba is a gold digger. She doesn't need to be out on the roof. She knows the king can see her. She waits for the call. She runs. She jumps into bed with him and works to make him king. Okay, that's an argument. That's one way to look at it. And I think the author of the book clearly wants this to be as benign as possible. He has to talk about Bathsheba because Bathsheba is where Solomon comes from. Okay, so you can't ignore Bathsheba. You can't ignore this event and all of the things that happen as a result. Because we're going to get into it in chapter 12. You can't ignore that. But if we look at it by the standards of 2025, like today, okay, we have to ask your question, could she have said no? And could she have said no? You know, by the skin, when the king comes in and says, "Hey, I want you," could she have said no? Well, I guess technically yes, I suppose. I mean, then you have the argument that in any sort of assault, in any sort of sexual assault, there's at some point the person gives in. Okay, again, this is a dumb argument, but I'm just saying. Okay, at some point the person gives in, so there's a consent at some point along the line. Could she have said no? Well, that's a question of whether she could or not. I don't think she could have. I don't think she could have said no. Did she have a real choice? Does she have a real choice in the matter? Okay, or is she just making the best of a bad situation? Okay, she's stuck in this situation. I mean, had David not stepped in, she would have been and married her. She didn't have to marry her, or she didn't have to marry him. He didn't have to marry her. But had she not, she would have had a child, been a single mother with a child. Okay, now is that a good thing? Now she's got some powerful relatives, but so they look at this and say there is a huge power differential here. If the CEO of a company who's employs two married employees comes down and sees a good-looking girl on an assembly line and says, "Hey, come here," you know, and the woman knows that the how she pleases the CEO is going to affect both her career and her husband's career. Okay, and she says, "Yes, okay, fine." What do we think of that CEO? Do we look at that CEO and do we say, "Oh, that's a man after God's own heart"? How do we look at that CEO today? So by the standards of 2025, you know, I think it does. But again, you can disagree with me. It's not an important point to the text itself, um, but it's a question of standards of the day. It's like again, looking back at when we talk about the battles when they went wiped out and killed infants and children and things like that. Okay, by the standards of the day, is that how we do battles today? No, not supposed to at least. Okay. But again, we need to be cognizant of this, that there are people who have been in situations like that. They were the girl on the assembly line. That if you are talking about David and Bathsheba, and suddenly you go, "Oh, well, Bathsheba clearly was willing and clearly was complicit," and honestly, she may have been. I wasn't there. Okay, all we have is what the text tells us. Okay, but it is one of those things. But whatever it was, it displeased the Lord. And we're going to find out why in the end of it when we talk about chapter 12 next week. All right. Thank you very much.
Me too. Yeah.